Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast. I'm your host, TJ Mabarty. Today is Wednesday, April 17th, and we finally have some postseason basketball sort of on our hand with the play-in tournaments. Super exciting. Those last few weeks of the NBA, especially coming off of March Madness, can tend to get a little bit stale, but last night was action-packed. We had a tremendous game between the Lakers and Pelicans that we're going to dive into, as well as the Kings-Warriors game, and somewhat what does this mean for the Warriors moving forward. We also have some breaking news on Jontay Porter receiving a lifetime ban from the NBA amidst all of these gambling rumors, so we will dive into that story as well. And then finally, we are going to end off the show by talking a little WNBA draft, which took place on Monday night. Haven't had a chance to cover that yet, and sort of the conversations that are circling around the future of the league. But before we dive into all of that, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us here at the GSMC Sports Network. Be sure to check us out on socials and check out the other amazing shows that we host on this network. For any of our live viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on the latest happening in sports. Try to address as much as possible and make this show as interactive as possible. And if you would consider leaving a tip or donation, you can use the link gsmcpodcast.net. Anything would be greatly appreciated. Last night, we had the matchup between the Lakers and Pelicans kick off the play-in action, as we had the 7-8 matchup winner with a chance to advance to the first round officially and secure a great reward of being able to play the reigning champion Denver Nuggets in the first round. Felt like there were a lot of unknowns headed into this game. LeBron and Anthony Davis were both game time decisions. Anthony Davis was dealing with back spasms in the last game of the regular season for the Lakers, and there was also this sort of conversation that was light but was sort of circulating about the possibility of the Lakers trying to purposefully lose this game in order to face off against the Thunder in the first round, other than the Nuggets, which was a ridiculous theory really from the start, but was something that was talked about. This was Zion playing the biggest game of his career. He's never been to the playoffs before. This isn't technically a postseason game, so when you see the type of performance he has, no, it's technically not playoffs, but it was still a momentous occasion, had the weight of a playoff game, and he absolutely delivered. And then we still weren't sure what we were going to get out of Brandon Ingram returning from injury, just his second game back after missing just about a month with a knee contusion. And it was the Pelicans coming out hot in the first quarter before the Lakers really started running away with it during the second and third. In both of those quarters, the Pelicans came out extremely sloppy. We saw both of these teams sort of struggle in the half court, but the Pelicans were especially so, only scored 18 points or so in the second quarter, even less than that, 16 points in the second quarter, and their bad offense sort of translated to the Lakers being able to go on a couple of these significant runs. The Lakers were up by 18 points over halfway through the third quarter when Zion Williamson helped spark some life back into the Pelicans, and he really became the story of this game. He scored 10 points, I believe, in the first quarter alone anyways, so it's not like he wasn't contributing through the entirety of the game, but during this third quarter run is really when it felt like Zion was going to have this, statement moment in his career. And it really was a reminder of how far we've come with Zion, where during the in-season tournament, during the regular season, the Lakers and the Pelicans faced off during the knockout round, and LeBron was willingly taking the Zion assignment, played extremely far off of him, and Zion, when he was about 20 pounds heavier, not in as good of game shape, was much less effective. But Zion found a way to sort of overcome this disrespectful defense almost the Lakers were playing on him, and use that space that they were giving him to his advantage. And he did so without having a real perimeter shot either, where I thought he did a tremendous job of getting involved in some two-man action that sort of compromised defenses, where he would set screens, he ran some dribble handoffs, and then would immediately roll to the basket after those. Again, involving that second teammate, sort of forced the Lakers to play up a little bit more, which gave both himself and his teammates lanes to the rim. He was extremely proactive in attacking some mismatches in his eyes, and I think one of the most notable things was the fact that Zion Williamson saw Anthony Davis as one of those mismatches time and time again throughout the course of the game. He was not afraid to take it at Anthony Davis, who is going to be on an all-defensive team. I had him on the first team. He's going to be a finalist for Defensive Player of the Year, and yet Zion did not care. He repeatedly went after him and was just driving through his chest and getting what he wanted at the rim. He also beat the Lakers in general, and a little bit LeBron specifically, on a handful of backdoor cuts, getting himself extra looks at the rim as well. So I thought this was just about as good as we have seen of a game from Zion, and just the activity, the energy that he brings. He helped ignite this Pelicans run at the end of the third quarter to go on a 19-8 run, get the deficit down to 7, and ultimately they sort of carried that momentum into the fourth quarter. Now, things did start out a little bit sloppy in that fourth, where Zion was on the bench. You had CJ McCollum and Brandon Ingram in the game for the Pelicans. They combined for 0 for 4 in those first few minutes. Both of them really struggled in this game in particular, but at the 7:38 mark, Willie Green decided to roll with a lineup of Jose Alvarado, Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, Zion, and Larry Nance. The group immediately went on a 9-0 run, and they were eventually able to tie the game at the 3:53 mark, where Alvarado hit Zion on a near half-court lob for a dunk. Zion then on the next possession caught Anthony Davis again in one of these switches where he drove right through him, hit a floater over him to put himself at 40 points. And unfortunately, that was the play that ended the night for Zion Williamson. He had to head back to the locker room after dealing with what's being labeled as a hamstring injury. It was very strange. It was very hard to tell what happened actually in that moment, but he was clearly grimacing. He was clearly very upset that he had to leave. This is a player who's very much been handicapped by injuries through the start of his young career. And from there, at that point, it's a tie game for the Pelicans, and things sort of started to fall apart for them, where Zion left the game. Willie Green decided to sub in CJ McCollum for a lot of those closing minutes. LeBron immediately backed down McCollum, forced a double team, and got himself to the free throw line. Now, CJ did end up scoring a couple buckets and assisting on a Trey Murphy drive that made his box score look a little bit better, but ultimately wasn't necessarily a great night for him. But I do bring this up because of the fact that a lot of fans were upset with the fact that Willie Green didn't play Brandon Ingram more in that fourth quarter. Again, it was just those first few minute stretch of the beginning of the fourth quarter. And honestly, I didn't have a huge problem with the fact that Ingram wasn't in this game to close it, really. He was on a minutes restriction as it was because of the returning from injury, And frankly, the Pelicans offense, even dating back to his first game back when the Pelicans played the Lakers on Sunday in the regular season finale, it just hadn't looked very good through the first 7 quarters back with Brandon Ingram. Now, I absolutely don't say that to blame him in this scenario, but the Pelicans were really struggling, and this group that Willie Green was rolling out there pretty much checked all the boxes that they needed. They were extremely active on defense. They were pushing in the fast break and getting opportunities, and they had a level of spacing that really wasn't there when the Pelicans were rolling with their starting lineup. So, Ingram, it looked like he was sort of a version of himself in that first quarter when the Pelicans offense did look good in the half court, but Ingram really cooled off from there. He finished 4 of 12 during the game as a whole. And again, when you're in that type of a situation, I feel like you have to stick with what's working. And that lineup that Willie Green had out on the court, the way that Herb Jones and Trey Murphy were both playing, I don't really know who you would have subbed Brandon Ingram in for in that circumstance. Now, once Zion left the game, there is definitely a conversation of you put Brandon Ingram instead of CJ McCollum. But again, outside of McCollum getting back down on that LeBron possession, I thought that he did fine, and I don't know how much more Brandon Ingram really could have done in that instance. But some of the offensive execution down the stretch was a little unfortunate for the Pelicans, where Herb Jones got a steal off of a deflection from a LeBron pass, and it seemed like Alvarado just sort of passed up on a layup attempt and instead tried to kick the ball out to the corner. That ends up being a turnover. He rolls his ankle. He took a beating in this game in general, but he ends up on the floor and he was slow to get back. The Lakers end up getting a 4-on-5 the other way. Reeves hits Anthony Davis for a lob, and then there was another instance where Larry Nance had a chance to tie the game when he was at the free throw line with 1:08 left in the game. He ends up missing one of those, and then immediately on the other side, D'Angelo Russell, who was really impressive in this game and has just continuously proven the doubters wrong throughout this, the last handful of months. Once his name was sort of thrown in those trade rumors earlier on in the year, he has been a different player, and he was terrific in this game as well, where Russell, he ends up going 5 of 11 from 3, 7 of 14 from the field, and scores 21 points, but he hits the corner 3 there to make it a 2-possession game with 51 seconds left. And the game wasn't actually still over even then. McCollum came back and got a quick little fade while in the paint to go to make it a 2-score game. And then the Pelicans forced the Lakers and LeBron James into a pretty bad shot with about 17 seconds left. But Anthony Davis grabbed the offensive rebound. It was pretty impressive. I know that I'm not going to break down the mechanics of rebounding too much, but just the length of Davis to be able to sort of go around Larry Nance and bring in that rebound. He gets himself to the free throw line and knocks them both down to essentially end that game. People were upset about the fact that Brandon Ingram wasn't getting these minutes in the fourth quarter. I actually thought the more questionable move was not having Jonas Valanciunas in the game for that final defensive possession, where as much as Larry Nance served a very key role in helping the Pelicans fight their way back into this game based off of the spacing, based off of the pace that he can play with, I thought that all of those minutes were justified, but Anthony Davis was also owning Larry Nance on the glass. He ends up with 6 offensive rebounds in this game and the dagger as a result of another rebound. Now, they subbed in Dyson Daniels for CJ McCollum prior to that possession. They could have put in Valanciunas as well, and I understand that playing this retroactive coaching game is never really fair, but the Pelicans did end up taking a timeout after those Anthony Davis made free throws anyways, and they could have subbed Larry Nance back in then. And again, they probably don't call the timeout if they do secure the rebound and they look for a quick shot on the other end. But either you get a good shot then, or Willie Green calls the timeout in the half court and the Pelicans can set up from there. Maybe I'm being too harsh there. You tell me, but again, I thought that that was the more questionable coaching decision from Willie Green in that situation. But again, Zion really was the story in this game, scoring 40 points on 17 of 27 from the field. That is a season-high points for him this year. He did his scoring in meaningful ways where it seemed like the Pelicans were a little bit dead in the water for a lot of that stretch, but especially in the third quarter, but he ignited the team and he was really the focal point of that offense, opened up opportunities as well for his teammates on the perimeter, made some nice defensive plays, including a big forced LeBron miss with a few minutes left as they were making their run to end up tying the game in the fourth quarter. And the injury is just extremely unfortunate. He's struggled with injuries through his career. A hamstring injury is not something that is uncommon for him. So we'll see. I do think that it does play in a little bit if you're going to be any sort of critical of Zion, which I'm not trying to be, but making sure that he comes into next season in better shape. That was something that he reflected on during the course of the year, that he felt like he let his teammates down a little bit because he wasn't at his 100% as the season started. But we did just get the report from ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski that he is going to be out for their next play-in tournament game against the Sacramento Kings, ending his season for the most part. We actually still, as I say that now, the Pelicans do still have a little bit of a puncher's chance. They're going to have home court once again against the Kings in their game tomorrow night, but without Zion and with a hindered Brandon Ingram, I do feel like the Kings are probably favored in that game, but who knows? We'll see. I do feel like with a healthy Zion, they could at least, make things difficult for Oklahoma City in the first round, because the winner of that game will advance to play the Thunder, and we'll get into the Kings part of this in the next segment. But again, just super unfortunate with Zion here. LeBron called him a generational talent in his post-game, actually, interestingly enough, which is something that we heard a lot about Zion coming into the league. But again, these injuries have gotten in the way. And, when you're getting that sort of recognition from LeBron James, that does mean something, at least in my eyes. But again, Pelicans going to be playing the Kings tomorrow night. We will be sure to touch more on that on Friday, but briefly here on the Lakers side of this, because I know I've spent a lot of the time here talking about New Orleans. This wasn't even really the most convincing Lakers game. That you can sort of spin it a couple different ways. I don't think they played their best necessarily, and they still won, but they're also going to need their best moving on to face the Denver Nuggets in this game. I don't think that, this can be labeled as a bad LeBron James game, where especially when we talk about the fast break and the fact that the Lakers were really capitalizing on missed turnovers from the Pelicans. That's when LeBron James was really going into his field general mode and surveying the defense, getting opportunities for himself in transition at the rim, while also setting up his teammates as well. 6 of 20 is definitely not great. Now, he did have Herb Jones guarding him. I love me some Herb Jones. Definitely should be first team All-NBA in my eyes. So I do sort of defend. I think Herb Jones is a better defender especially along the perimeter, better than any player that the Nuggets have. I do like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope's defense as well, but Herb Jones is just on another level. So that's probably the toughest defensive assignment that he is going to face in this postseason run. But at the same time, it's sort of asking more out of those other guys. Anthony Davis, again, offensive rebounds were absolutely massive. It wasn't necessarily himself capitalizing on all those second chance points, but it was also finding teammates. He was just 6 of 16 from the field, almost all of his takes coming in the paint. Again, this is a team in New Orleans that does have a lot of size, not just Zion, but Jonas Valanciunas when he was in this game as well. And you got the contributions from some of these other players that you sort of expect. I thought that Rui Hachimura hit a couple big shots for them. D'Angelo Russell, obviously, the night that he had, super hot first quarter, and then had that massive three in the final minute in the corner to sort of put the game a little bit more out of reach. But it's just about the bench production for them. They really don't have the level of depth that you would hope from them. Taurean Prince and Gabe Vincent were the two players who got double-digit minutes for them in this game. Prince was just 2 of 7 with 6 points. Gabe Vincent was fine. I thought, he brings the defensive energy and he can knock down some shots from outside, but again, ever since they played a lot with their rotation this year, are we going to put Austin Reeves coming off the bench? Is it going to be D'Angelo Russell? And they still sort of staggered their minutes to some degree, but they're just very reliant on their starters. And another situation, like I mentioned, the half-court offense wasn't really great in this game. They're going to have to push it against the Nuggets if they want to have a chance, but the Nuggets are a team that is much more comfortable operating in the half-court. They'll probably try and slow the game down against the Lakers. We'll see if we have a little bit of a contrasting play style between those two teams, but I think that the Nuggets are the best team in the NBA in my eyes, so it is hard to pick against them, and I'm not going to be. I think that the Lakers, again, can make all of these games competitive like they did last year. Yes, it was them getting swept by the Nuggets, but did so in a very tight margin where every single game was close. I think the Lakers can steal one, but this is still a situation where I just think that the Nuggets are a better team. The Lakers, it's not fully ready to count them out here necessarily. I do feel like they can have one more push next year with the way they can retool some things, and we'll dive more into that as the offseason progresses. But as for now, I'm going to pick the Denver Nuggets in 5, but let me know what you think about this series in the comment section. For now, though, we are going to be taking our first break of the show, and when we come back, we're going to be diving into the Kings-Warriors matchup that took place later that night. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news if it's some moosey shit. A stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We just finished up talking about the Lakers Pelicans play-in tournament game that took place last night. That was the real thriller of the night because we saw on the later slate the Sacramento Kings really hand it to the Warriors and end up with the win there to end the Warriors season. They take away the win 118-94, and this was possibly an end of an era here in Golden State. We will get into those questions, but as for this game itself, this was a little bit of a weird one because it felt like the Warriors just never really had their game, and yet despite that, they were down by just 4 points at halftime, and it seemed like there was a real chance that they could get themselves going. Steph Curry only had 5 points at half, and that is because of Keon Ellis, who had a phenomenal game last night. And we talked about this sort of leading into the playoffs. He has done such a tremendous job to fill in for specifically Malik Monk in some of those minutes, who was the sixth man of the year in my eyes. He goes down with an injury at the end of March, and Keon Ellis has found his way into the starting lineup. You would think that these are probably minutes that if you are the Kings GM, you probably wish Davion Mitchell was giving that level of production after selecting him in the lottery a couple years ago. But no, it's the undrafted Keon Ellis, who his energy and what he provides for the Kings team here was just so impressive. There were some funny minutes with him towards the end of the game when this was just about locked up, when you saw Mike Brown really getting on Ellis. And that's the thing, is it was because Ellis was clearly tired. He was laboring a little bit after chasing around Steph Curry all night long. And Mike Brown, who of course used to work on the Warriors staff, was very clear, you can't let up yet. The game's not over. We can't let Steph Curry get hot, which is very fair. But Keon Ellis, again, the game that he had he deserves tons of credit, where he had 3 steals and 3 blocks. This is of course from a guard position, and his energy was just incredibly impactful. And, I mentioned Davion Mitchell. The Kings probably wish that Davion Mitchell was a little more on the level of Keon Ellis, but he was also making some impactful spark plug plays as well. Knocked down at least one big 3 there, even though we did struggle from the field in this game. But really, like I said, the Kings got out to this hot start thanks to Keegan Murray, who scored 14 points in the first quarter. Keegan Murray, one of my favorite players in the league, and they sort of rode that through the first half as a whole, where really the second quarter, in a lot of stretches here, this was a pretty ugly game. Like I said, the Warriors never really had it all together, but it's not like the Kings put the pressure on Golden State until the third quarter, where it was De'Aaron Fox sort of getting himself going in this one. He had at least 14 points in the quarter, and that's when the Kings really started rolling. Domantas Sabonis was also incredible in this game. Now, he was dealing with some foul trouble that limited him to a certain degree, but again, this is a little bit of a flipping the script situation here, where last year Sabonis was sort of, I wouldn't quite say exposed, especially considering he was dealing with an injury during the Kings series against the Warriors last year in the playoffs. But after putting together this tremendous season, it was almost downplayed as a result of, frankly, Draymond Green sort of was just the alpha in that matchup in particular. And again, Sabonis was not 100%, so that's not totally fair to say, but it was a massive reason as to why the Warriors were able to come out of that one. And also just the fact that Warriors had nobody else really going for them other than Steph Curry, who, again, he had 5 points in the first half. He had only taken 5 shots, one of them being a half-court heave to end off the first half, so he wasn't really looking to be quite as aggressive. He got himself going in the second half a little bit more, was more assertive, taking 11 shots in the second half, scoring 17 points, but he was just doing it on his own, and by the end of the game, the Kings were literally throwing 2-3 defenders at Steph every single possession, and nobody else could make it count for the Warriors in this situation. Jonathan Kuminga provided some, especially earlier on in the game. He gave some good minutes attacking, got himself going, especially in the second quarter. Moses Moody, I just can't quit him. He wasn't necessarily a game changer in this game, but I thought that he was probably a top 3 best player on Golden State last night to at least some degree. I know he only played 15 minutes, but he was incredibly efficient. He was getting to the free throw line when he was, and playing some solid defense as well. But for the Warriors here, I mean, you have to look at the fact that Klay Thompson, there's been so much conversation surrounding him this season. He ends up going 0 for 10 from the field and was just a completely dejected look on his face after he missed that final three-pointer. Seemed like he was just questioning everything, which, again, I know that a lot of people dislike the Warriors because of the dynasty that they've been for the past, almost decade, but it is legitimately sad to see sort of Klay Thompson in this type of a funk where he is one of the best three-point shooters of all time, and going to be very interesting to see what happens with him in the offseason. Steve Kerr made it adamant that he wants Klay Thompson to be back, that they're all in on having him remain around. Big question is going to be what the contract situation looks like, because the Warriors were the most expensive team in the NBA this season, in that second threshold for the luxury tax, and yet they were the 10 seed in the regular season and have failed to make the playoffs. Unfortunately, they've failed to make the playoffs in a handful of these recent years, despite also winning a final. So it's not like it's been this incredibly disappointing run for them, and they even made the second round last year, but they're going to have loads of questions surrounding them. I don't think that it's completely over for them necessarily. You still have Steph Curry, who, again, I don't think you can have watched that game last night and blame him for the reason the Warriors lost that game. They still have him at, I wouldn't quite say the peak of his powers. He's not the MVP level that he was in the 2010s, but he's still an incredible player. And they got the contributions from some of their young players this season in Jonathan Kuminga, Brandon Podziemski, Trace Jackson Davis, who didn't play very much last night. It just seemed like it was sort of a bad matchup to have him. He ended up starting the game but only played 11 minutes because they had Draymond guarding Domantas Sabonis, and as a result, Jackson Davis was playing more on the perimeter. I believe he was initially matched up against Harrison Barnes, and it just really didn't add up there. Jackson Davis very possibly could be on an all-rookie team as well, but that was not the position you wanted him in necessarily. But sort of on the conversation of the big man position, I thought that one of the key statistics from the game, and I guess the discrepancy isn't even totally outstanding, in terms of total rebounds, but the rebounding battle from last year in the playoffs to this year, where Kevon Looney was putting on an absolute clinic in terms of operating the glass to the way that it was the Kings this time around. 49 rebounds to 42, but specifically 15 to 8 in the offensive rebound department. The Kings getting themselves second chance opportunities, and that's, I think, in large part sort of what led to the Warriors just not having their heart in it. It was early in the fourth quarter even. There was an instance where Draymond Green chased an uncontested rebound too far out of bounds, stepped on the sideline, and it resulted in a turnover. It was the Warriors' third turnover in the first 4 minutes of the fourth quarter, and from that point it just seemed like they were checked out. And this is a Warriors team that in the past has never gotten too down on themselves when the odds were against them, but it didn't seem like they had that same mental makeup this year. And again, going to be interesting to see how they retool, because I wouldn't say, they need to make changes. I wouldn't say it's an entire blow it up, start the rebuild situation, because you have Steph Curry still at the level of play that he's giving you, but going to need to find a way to cut costs. We've talked about this on the show for a handful of months now. The Andrew Wiggins contract is a massive negative for them. And, last night definitely was not his best game. I wouldn't say that he was necessarily their worst issue. I mean, he was still providing some defense for them. The shot wasn't there, and everything just looked disjointed for the Warriors last night. Both teams, I want to look right now at the turnover numbers, because the Warriors had 16, and Kings had 8 as well. I'm actually surprised that that's as low as it was, but they did play a much cleaner second half. But this was just, a very interesting game here, where you have the sort of subplot of the Kings, the Kings coming back into, they were home court advantage, and sort of leads to why this was so momentous. And I think it was a huge advantage that they had the home court behind them, but this felt like it had a little bit of extra baggage behind it from a historical standpoint, and they come out, win this game. And for the Kings, they are advancing to play the New Orleans Pelicans in a game to potentially seal a playoff berth. The winner of that game tomorrow night will advance to play the Oklahoma City Thunder, who are a very talented team, are in no means, though, an ungettable team. I do think that the Thunder probably come out on top in a series against either one of those opponents, especially if Zion is not going to be playing for them. He's supposed to be reevaluated in a couple weeks, which does not make it sound like he is going to be available, even if the Pelicans do advance here. But for the Kings to overcome the adversity, last year was sort of the perfect situation for them, where they had a lot of health, they had a lot of things going for them, they were this fun up-and-coming team. But this year, losing Malik Monk, who was incredibly important for them, losing Kevin Huerter, and still being able to overcome this type of adversity and end up knocking off, probably from a Kings perspective, if there are any Kings fans out there that have different input, probably their biggest rival in the NBA. So credit to the Kings there. I'm sure we're going to be talking plenty about the Warriors as the offseason nears closer. But on that note, we are going to be taking our second break, and when we come back on the other side, we're going to be diving into the news about Jontay Porter receiving a lifetime ban from the NBA. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. we just wrapped up both of the play-in tournament games and are now going to be moving on to the news that just broke within the past hour about Jontay Porter receiving a lifetime ban from the NBA. This is something that has sort of been circulating for the past couple months or so. I'd say probably closer to a month, but the Jontay Porter saga is centered around the fact that he was being accused of potentially manipulating NBA games in terms of gambling and violating the league's policy surrounding gambling. There was some unusual action on Jontay Porter prop bets that were very heavily profitable for the bettors, and this is a situation for Jontay Porter who, frankly, should not be the biggest gainer in terms of the most profitable bet in any circumstance, where a lot of NBA fans probably didn't know who Porter was headed into this saga because of the fact that, he was a 2-year player. He's been in the G League for a lot of the year, was playing for the Raptors more down the stretch of the regular season because of the fact that frankly, the Raptors were not in a point of contention anymore. They had sort of thrown the season away, and he was, getting these minutes for the Raptors, but even still under 15 minutes per game. And it was very fishy from the beginning that there was this type of betting action on him. So the NBA has been conducting this investigation against him and these irregularities in some of the betting action, and they found that he is responsible for a handful of different instances where some people that he was close to were the ones that were the beneficiaries of these prop bets for Jontay Porter, that he himself was actually doing some of the gambling based off of the using his confidants' accounts and such. And really what Adrian Wojnarowski pointed to was the fact that he actually bet against a Raptors game, which was really damning for him. And this is a situation where a lot of people are sort of calling that the fact that some of the, specifically I think that the biggest comparison from this situation to another in the NBA and the way that the different punishments are being laid out is the fact that Miles Bridges got a 1-year suspension and that Jontay Porter is getting a lifetime ban, and people are trying to draw the comparisons between the two because obviously what Miles Bridges did from a humanity standpoint is obviously much, much worse than Jontay Porter betting on some basketball games. And yet for the league themselves, if they want to stay credible, they can't have this door open for the idea of NBA players sort of foiling the game. We talked about this in depth when the story was first coming out, but the fact that the MLB really struggled with gambling when they were coming up in the early 1900s, and they have, placed some lifetime bans as well for some notable members of MLB history. I think that this is just a situation where, yes, I understand that it's not like this is the worst thing to do in the world as far as a crime that an individual can commit. I don't even think it's being classified as a crime, but from a credibility standpoint of the NBA, they sort of have no choice but to make sure that they set an example for a player here. And you can, I mean, there are people who disagree with the fact that NBA and professional athletes aren't allowed to gamble. frankly, it's just one of the rules for these leagues. And yes, I understand that there is a level of advertisement and sponsorships that these gambling companies provide to these professional leagues. So why can't the athletes use them? Well, they're actually making money off of these sponsorships and deals that the league generates more revenue because of the fact that they are sponsored by these regulated sports books. And, sports betting is something that's going to go on. It's been happening for, centuries, and nothing's going to stop that situation. The fact that it's being regulated, though, does make these types of situations a lot easier to actually track down. And again, Jontay Porter in this situation, I just think it's a stupid thing to do. You're on a two-way contract. It's not like he was desperate for money. I at least would imagine. I don't know what his personal life is like necessarily, but his father, I believe, I don't know if he still is, but was the head coach of Missouri basketball for a handful of years at least. He's brothers with Michael Porter Jr., who is one of the premier players in the NBA, and this was just an idiotic thing to do. He was still making hundreds of thousands of dollars while playing on this contract that doesn't even make him a full-time NBA player, and he's now thrown away his future. It's not like he didn't understand what the rules are, and to some level, he had to have known that what he was doing was wrong when it comes to basically subbing himself out of some games because of the fact that he subbing himself out with an eye injury and an undisclosed illness. He knew that he was rupturing the integrity of the game in these instances, and I just don't really understand how people can empathize with him that much. And listen, I understand not everything in life, frankly, is fair. And whether you think Miles Bridges should be playing in the NBA or not, that shouldn't have an effect on how long the suspension/ban is for Jontay Porter. Two wrongs don't make a right. As much of a cliche as that is, it's just a fact. And both things can be true. That Miles Bridges maybe shouldn't be playing in the NBA because of his domestic violence instance, but also Jontay Porter shouldn't be allowed to be a member of a professional sports league when he is caught by manipulating the sports books that are major partners with the league. And whether they were major partners or not, it's essentially throwing games. And Jontay Porter is not the, high-level player that he can have he doesn't have the weight to be able to fully throw a game. But at the same time, the precedent of it just needs to be set that the NBA is serious. Yes, there is so much sports gambling that is going on in the world today, but that doesn't mean that the reputation of the game and the leagues themselves can be sort of at risk because of this reckless behavior. And Jontay Porter isn't the only one who has been only professional athlete that's been caught gambling as of late. There was Keyshawn Boutte of the New England Patriots. There was Calvin Ridley, who missed a year as well when he was, I think it was when he was with the Falcons into his stint with the Jacksonville Jaguars. And, these instances happen, but it's especially dumb to actually bet on the league that you are a member of and to the team that you're a member of as well. And it's not even like a situation, I'm totally blanking on the MLB, Pete Rose, I believe it is. The fact that he is one of the all-time hits leaders. He was a very well dignified manager in the MLB. He received a lifetime ban because of the fact that he was betting on his teams, and in that case he was betting on them to win. The idea of playing in an NBA game, and I'm not sure if he actually got minutes. There still hasn't been all too much details on that instance in particular. Just following along here as the news broke just before the show that Adrian Wojnarowski has been tweeting out here. The NBA released a statement as well, but until we're going to keep you updated, of course, on the full details as they're released. But the fact that Porter would be a member of a franchise and then choose to bet against them is just a ludicrous thing to do. And he should be. This is a justified lifetime ban in my eyes. And I really do feel like I struggle to empathize with this type of a situation. But let me know in the comments section whether or not you agree. Again, I understand sometimes the consistencies when it comes to, really we see this in the NFL all the time, but there is at least a semi-recent example in the NBA surrounding the Bridges situation. But I think they pretty much had no choice but to ban him for life. We'll see whether or not he is ever able to sort of appeal this decision. Either way, it's Jontay Porter who was on a two-way contract. I feel like the most likely scenario is he's going to be disgraced from the game and he won't ever get another chance in the NBA, but we will see. On that note, though, we are going to be taking our final break of the show, and when we come back on the other side, I want to dive into some WNBA talk with the draft taking place on Monday, sort of breaking down how that all played out, as well as touching on some of the conversations regarding the contract situation of Caitlin Clark headed into her rookie season. But stick with us and we will dive into all of that next.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We're headed into our final segment of the day, and I wanted to touch on the 2024 WNBA draft, which took place on Monday night. I haven't had a chance to react to it just yet, so here we are now. The draft became the most viewed WNBA draft in history. It had never surpassed 1 million viewers in the past. And they not only hit 1 million, but they hit 2.4 million viewers on Monday night, which is another big time step after the historic viewership numbers during the women's NCAA tournament. Caitlin Clark, no surprise, of course, was selected number 1 overall, now officially a member of the Indiana Fever. Some of the other biggest college stars and their landing spots here. Cameron Brink was taken by the LA Sparks with the 2nd overall pick. She's going to be joined by another top 4 pick in Rickea Jackson from Tennessee, who LA took with that 4th overall pick. We have another team-up situation as well in Chicago, as Camila Cardoso of South Carolina is going to be teaming up with Angel Reese of LSU, who were both selected in the top 10 by the Chicago Sky. Like Cardoso said after the draft, nobody is getting rebounds on them. A little bit of a Twin Towers situation. Possibly Cardoso averaged 10 rebounds per game last season. Reese averaged 13. Obviously different teams, but still a very fun pairing there. UConn's Aaliyah Edwards was taken with the 6th overall pick by the Washington Mystics. And Kate Martin, Caitlin Clark's teammate at Iowa, who supposedly went to the draft just to support Caitlin Clark, did see her name get called in the second round by the reigning champion Las Vegas Aces. A lot of people, by the way, not that I'm an expert necessarily on all of this, not my expertise at least, a lot of people really loving how the Aces handled their draft as they're looking for a three-peat this year. But on the note of the viewership numbers and the potential of the league's growth in popularity, these next couple years I do think are going to be pretty much make or break for if this league is going to at least show signs of being profitable, where there is tons of momentum in the women's basketball sport coming off of this record-breaking women's tournament. They have a star-studded rookie class with a lot of these big-time names that the league has really never fully seen before. Now, listen, I understand plenty of legends that have come out of the college game and into the professional leagues, but in terms of, household name recognition, I don't think that there has been this level and this of both, how powerful these names are and the quantity of a lot of these big time names. So should be a lot of fun to see there. But there is this conversation that has sort of broke out surrounding the WNBA and the fact that Caitlin Clark's contract is going viral after being the number one overall pick. She got a 4-year deal worth $338,000, which frankly is not very much for, of course, being a number one overall selection, but her contract is going to be something along the lines of in the 60,000 mark for the first couple years. Finally, it's going to reach 90 by her 4th season, which is actually an option. But many people are pointing to Victor Wembanyama's contract, who was of course, the most recent number one overall pick in the NBA. His deal is going to be worth $55 million over 4 years. And a lot of people are talking about how outrageous and how unfair this is. Even President Joe Biden sort of chimed in on the conversation, saying this is an example of how women need to be paid more fairly. I really don't think that this is a women's rights issue. I think it's more about basic economics and the current state surrounding the women's college basketball game. And, we are totally pro women's sports in this situation, and we do want to uplift them, but there is also just a little bit of a reality here that the WNBA has never turned a profit. The NBA has basically been funding the league's existence over the past handful of years, and you can argue that some of the reasons surrounding the popularity of the league is the fact that the same resources haven't been poured into women's basketball quite as much. But I think the reality is there just hasn't been the same level of stardom that was necessary to really uplift an up-and-coming sport. This happened with every single league that existed. The sort of exponential growth that we saw, it was the case with the NBA during the 1950s. Even the NFL took a very long time to surpass the college football world, and now it seems like with all of these names coming into the league, people are actually going to care more. And I do agree that the marketing surrounding the women's game now is at an all-time high, and that absolutely helps. But even still, I think that marketing can only take you so far, and not as many people cared about the women's game up until these recent years. I think that's going to change, and we can root for the game to grow while also acknowledging the other factors as to why someone with the stature of Caitlin Clark is going to be making as little money as she is through her first contract. And a lot of people are pointing to the fact that she got this, I think it was $3 million offer from the Big Three to actually go and play with them instead. And I do think that Caitlin Clark also is going to be making up a lot of this money in endorsements, which is, obviously going to help her financial situation. But and I don't think she's going to be, living that penny to penny lifestyle because of that. But I think that it is very big of her to understand this, that she holds a role. She talked about this with her legacy ahead of the national championship game. It's not necessarily about scoring X amount of points or X amount of wins. It's about uplifting the game as a whole, what she leaves behind, especially for the next generations. And she has the potential to be, and along with, her skill as a whole, and on one hand anyways, is something to be debated about how great is she going to be in the league. But the level of, superstardom, the marketability of her, all of that plays into this in a massive way that I think she is going to help grow the sport. And the league has clearly sort of mimicked that thought as well, with the fact that I saw a stat from SportsCenter that 90% of Fever games are going to be nationally televised this season as things currently stand. This is a Fever team that was 13-27 last year, was at the bottom of the standings, and now there is, this situation where Caitlin Clark, in the eyes of ESPN, is must-see TV. And specifically with that as well, she's not just, a fan favorite and is somebody that the people want to watch, the national, viewers, but also the fact that the WNBA needs to capitalize on this type of momentum. And hopefully that momentum builds over the next few years to the point where by the time that Clark and the remainder of her rookie class are getting these big time contracts when they become free agents in a few years. And it stinks that this is the current situation, but the reality is, for everybody who is calling for these players to be getting paid more, where's the money coming from? Because the WNBA just can't afford it, and the NBA is already pouring tons of money into, I don't want to call it a project, it's a league that I think will be able to stand on its own sooner rather than later. But I don't really know what your solution would be as to how can these players make more money today. But, sort of on that note as well, there is the fact that there's some stories coming out about the idea that Caitlin Clark's first ever WNBA game is going to be May 14th, which also is going to line up sort of around the schedule of the NHL playoffs. And we saw women's basketball sort of rival NHL numbers this season. Listen, I myself am not the number one NHL fan in the world. I, follow it, of course, specifically the Bruins, but in general, I do watch the NHL, but the popularity levels of it aren't necessarily massive, and the women's basketball game is sort of catching up to it. So there's this idea that there may be a little bit of a conflict between Caitlin Clark's debut and how that plays into the NHL playoffs. She currently is slated to be playing on ESPN2, but that could be the same day of some NHL playoffs, which ESPN has a bunch of those games, of course, so going to be interesting to see how that plays out as well. But let me know what you think about the situation surrounding the WNBA, about Caitlin Clark, about the contract situation, all of that. We're going to be wrapping up the show, but first I want to address some comments in the section here from Kirito MVP 11, talking about Klay Thompson. He was offered a 6-year, $278 million deal by the Magic, and the Magic supposedly, according to Kirito, gave him some extra incentives that go beyond just the paycheck themselves. Should Klay Thompson take that deal, or should he be loyal to the Golden State Warriors? You know, for Klay at this point, I think it's hard to turn down a massive deal such as that. I don't know if I'm the Magic if I'm offering up that type of deal, although I do think that they are in position to potentially go out and spend this offseason. They have this up-and-coming core. They ended up as the 5 seed in the playoffs this year. They were in contention for the 2 seed heading into the final weeks, and they have, you know, some real franchise cornerstones, specifically Paolo Banchero being the monster that he is, being selected to his first ever All-Star appearance this year in just his second season. So, again, from a Magic perspective, I probably wouldn't hand out that deal. But for Klay Thompson, you know, it's really about what is his priority at this point in his career. Because if he still wants to go out and make significant money, that's a no-brainer. He's not going to get that type of a deal anywhere else at this point. You know, I still don't think that Klay is necessarily a zero in the NBA, even though last night was absolutely brutal for him. He can still play, but I don't think that the Warriors, especially for how expensive they currently are, and they're going to be able to offload that Chris Paul $30 million that they owe him, but it's still not going to fully absolve them of the financial situation they're in. I feel like it's really hard to justify giving Klay Thompson really more than $15 million a year, and I don't really know what the consensus is on what number people are looking to hand out to Klay Thompson. Maybe it's disrespectful, me saying $15 million, but I look at a deal like Kobe White, who is making $12 million, and that is a reliable, you know, can start everyday point guard, can be a big-time 6 Man of the Year candidate if that is the direction that either Chicago or whatever team that has him in the future can operate with. And that's a bargain of a deal. But that's the thing. I would pay Kobe White that money over Klay Thompson 10 times out of 10, and maybe that's a crazy take on my end. Again, I don't want to totally bury Klay Thompson, but I just don't think that he's that level of contributor. You know, the offense is great when it's great, but he still doesn't have that defensive prowess that made him such a special player for all those years. And I have a really hard time justifying the Warriors with the situation that they're currently in, because they're paying Andrew Wiggins as much money as they are, and Draymond Green as well, that they're going to have to cut back in certain areas. And I don't think you can overpay for Klay Thompson out of a loyalty factor. I know your question was about, should Klay Thompson be the one that's loyal? I think both parties are going to have to reflect on what sort of got them to this place, and Klay deserves, you know, all the love in the world from Warriors fans for everything he's done over the past couple years. But, you know, again, I keep saying couple years, a decade really is how long he's been a crucial contributor for them. But I feel like the Warriors definitely have a little bit more of a, you know, designated time slot here in the final years with Curry. They have to take advantage, and this is, you know, the last real chance that Klay Thompson has to potentially, the last chance he has to cash out. We'll see what the market looks like for him. And then Carito also mentioned a rumor about the Hornets putting in a trade offer for Steph Curry. That is something that, of course, Curry grew up in Charlotte a lot when Del Curry, his father, played for the Charlotte Hornets. And that's something that's always sort of, you know, been talked about a bit, is what if Steph went back to his hometown? The reality is, you know, it would be a fun story, but that would be a waste of the final years of the best version of Curry. Now, I'm not saying I would hate to see it necessarily. I feel like the Eastern Conference isn't the same level of difficulty as the West, but, you know, I think it would be a very iffy fit too. Not that, I mean, you take Steph Curry over LaMelo Ball 10 times out of 10, and if a trade were to be made, LaMelo would probably be a part of that. but what are the other pieces going around Steph Curry that make that worth it for the Hornets either? Where I love Brandon Miller. He would be, just about untradeable, specifically in the Steph Curry talks, but there's really not too much else surrounding that Charlotte team that would be super encouraging in terms of why the Hornets could do that. And if you're the Warriors, I mean, you probably want to hold on to Curry as long as possible. And I wouldn't even say go into a real rebuild. I think if you're the Warriors, you shouldn't be looking to rebuild. But, to your question, if the Warriors say they want to go into a rebuild, I mean, I hate to say this. I really do, because this would be, as a Celtics fan, a worst nightmare. But I don't know. And they really don't. I mean, what teams do have the assets to go out and get Curry? But I'm thinking like Philadelphia or a Miami. Like, those are teams that, again, the value it's going to take for trading for Steph Curry is really off the charts. But, I mean, who knows? There's also a situation where in Cleveland where Donovan Mitchell, there's been so much buzz over the past couple years that Mitchell is going to want out of Cleveland. Now, is Golden State going to sort of gamble on the idea of, can we get Donovan Mitchell to sign in the long term? And Mitchell's, of course, in his prime now, so it maybe doesn't make sense as a true building block, but also if they could get some long-term commitment from Donovan Mitchell, they get another piece in there as well, then that would be interesting. I believe Steph was born in Akron, if I'm not mistaken, so not necessarily the growing up in that area like Charlotte, but a little bit of a storyline there going back to Ohio where he was born. Could be interesting there. I mean, all the options here, I think the most likely situation is the Warriors are going to try and maximize their opportunities here in these final few seasons for, surrounding Curry with an actual championship contending roster, or at least try to, is the thing. I don't know if they can fully get there. Their young pieces are some massive chips for them in terms of trying to make some moves, the way that Podziemski and Trace Jackson Davis from this past year have been late draft picks, I should say, that have emerged the way that they have. Moses Moody, I'm still a believer in that he can be an effective piece on a team. If I'm another team, I would definitely be willing to potentially take some sort of a flyer, and I'm a team that's looking to rebuild. I would like Moody. Obviously, you probably want the Kuminga or you probably want Podziemski over him as well. The fact that I hesitated even that long was probably disrespectful to Podziemski, but I'm just a Moses Moody fan. But again, these are sort of the different decisions the Warriors are going to have to go with, and we know how good of a drafting organization this has been over the past decade or so, which was even further shown in this past year's draft. Do they want to give up draft capital to try and maximize their situation now? I think probably we saw them try and run with the two timelines at once, and it really just never panned out for them. One thing that I saw on social media earlier, and it does really just sort of make you think, is the fact that the Warriors were, just a couple lottery balls away from having that number one overall pick in 2020 and getting Anthony Edwards instead of James Wiseman. I mean, talk about night and day difference, and the Warriors would be, in a perfect situation going forward if that were the case. Just something that's sort of funny to reflect on. But I don't know. Let me know what you think about what the Warriors should do long term as well. That is all the time we have for today, but thank you very much for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Be sure to check us out on socials and keep up with the other great shows that we host here. just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe, and we will be back tomorrow afternoon, same time, 2 o'clock Eastern, to reflect on the play-in tournament games from tonight in the Eastern Conference, as well as all the other latest happenings in the sports world. So we will see you then.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great. Nice.